So make sure you stay muted until you're ready for your question. First, I'll just go ahead and talk about Miss Louise Paré here a little bit. She has a PhD in women's spirituality from California Institute of Integral Studies and a master's degree in religious studies from Mundelein College in Chicago. She's an international women's spirituality and movement educator with 30 plus years of experience, a social activist and published writer and poet, a former instructor at United Tribes Technical College in Bismarck, North Dakota. She was a member and participant in the 2016 to 2017 decolonization workshop series sponsored by Red Earth Descendants. She is the daughter of a Ukrainian mother and French-Canadian father and the oldest of 8 children. Harvesting her story has been an essential tool in becoming a co-conspirator. So without further ado, here is Louise to tell her story. And if you have any questions, please let me know. Thank you.
Welcome, and thanks to all who are on this call today for making time to join us for this exploration of harvesting our stories and becoming co-conspirators. I want to start today with a short say their names time. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use 2 names today. One will be of a Black man and one will be of a Black woman. And after I say their name and a little bit about them, I'm going to ask you, if you wish, where you are, to say their names with me. So the first name that I want to say today is Jacob Blake, Kenosha, Wisconsin, who a few days ago was shot 7 times in the back. He was unarmed and he was getting into his car in front of his 3 small children. He is a father, a husband, an uncle, a brother, and a friend. And now he lies paralyzed from the waist down in a hospital bed. The next thing I want to call is that of Breonna Taylor, 26 years old, shot and killed in her home on March 13 in Louisville, Kentucky. A sister, daughter, EMT, and aspiring ER nurse, and friend to many. In this case so far, 1 officer has only been fired, no officers have been charged, and the case has not moved forward. So now I ask you if you'd like to join me to say their names. Jacob Blake, Breonna Taylor. Thank you very much for joining me on that. That might start us off on a somber tone, but I think for me, as a social activist and a co-conspirator, it's one of the things I take as an educator to anchor myself clearly in this moment, which is a difficult one and a complicated one. And being a co-conspirator is a complicated thing because most of our stories are complex, which just honors how we as human beings are complex. When Jamie invited me to be part of this series, Racism in America, I welcomed the opportunity. My background, as you heard, is that I grew up here in the Rogue Valley. We had a small 6-acre farm 10 miles outside of Grants Pass. My dad worked in the lumber mills. My mother was very active in the home, raising 7 kids and always selling something to make ends meet. She was Ukrainian, my father was French-Canadian, and they were the first 2 in their ethnic lines to marry outside of those ethnic lines, and I'm the first child. So there was a lot for me to unpack with that, which I'll talk a little bit about later. As I thought about what I wanted to bring to the conversation, I remember the discussion in one of the presentations about the difference between being an ally and being a co-conspirator. So I found an essay by Alicia Garza, who is one of the co-founders of the Black Lives Movement. And she wrote this: "The thing I don't like about the word ally is that it is so wrought with guilt and shame and grief and anger that it prevents people from doing what they ought to do." So as I began to think about that, I began to think about my own evolution from being a social activist. And what I immediately remembered was an experience that I had when I was just kind of starting out. I was working in Mandan, North Dakota, Bismarck, North Dakota, sorry. And I was working on some type of a social justice project. At that time, I was a director for religious education for children and for adults. And one day I was in my office and a colleague of mine came in. We were both working on this project together, and she said something about the project. And as she was talking about it, I immediately got really angry. And I just started responding out of that anger and that passion. And I don't think I even remember what I said, but I remember what she said to me. What she said was, "Louise, why are you so angry?" And I immediately got defensive and self-righteous and said, "Well, if everybody cared as much as I do, everybody would be out there working, and not people just don't care." And so she kind of let that settle. And she said, "I understand your passion." Her voice changed. It became very empathic and caring. And she said, "But why are you so angry?" And in that moment, I flashed back to myself as an infant, as a young child, attempting to take my first steps and falling flat on my face on the ground, crying because I was born knock-kneed and pigeon-toed. And I didn't consciously have this knowledge at the time, but what was in my body was anger and fear and shame. When my mother saw that this was part of what was happening in my body, she did a lot to drive a Lawrence Pass to Portland before the days of freeways, and she and my dad spent a good amount of money to get me corrective shoes that would help what was happening with my feet. I hated them. I called them my ugly brown shoes, and I hated my mother for making me wear these to school because the kids made fun of me. And I again felt another layer of shame and embarrassment, and underneath it, anger. So I really got very interested in how was it that in that moment, with her caring question to me, when I could let down my defenses, I immediately was able to contact that experience, which was, 30 years ago. How was that possible? That really led me, among other things, to the questions that took me to my doctoral work, which was in the relationship of woman's body and spirituality and cultural transformation. And I'll come back to that in a moment. But what I did with that experience was I did a lot of journaling. So I was doing a lot of journaling at the time. I wrote a lot about what I felt. So basically what I did was I took that really huge energy that, as my friend said, was much more, was larger than what the experience really required or needed. And I took that energy and I put it into other forms. And as I did that, journaling and movement and dance. And as I did that, the energy of that in me changed. So that when I contacted my anger for that project, it was no longer so huge. It was more appropriate to the size of the issue that we were working with. And it no longer divided me and separated me from other people who were working on it. And so it was really a big life lesson. Another experience was equally profound for me. One of the first issues that I became really passionate about had to do with global hunger. And I joined an organization called Bread for the World. And I got very involved in it. And I didn't understand why. I'd never experienced hunger. We always, even though we were working class, I never experienced hunger. We had our own farm, we had plenty of food. So I was just really interested in why is this so important to me? When I began doing my movement work, I contacted a part of myself directly that was my infant self, my just born self. And when I was born, my mother was not able to breastfeed me. She had a situation of her nipples were turned inward and there was nobody to really help with that at that time. So I spent about the first 36 hours of my life screaming and crying and being in a very contracted position because I was starving. Later, and just you know, the story didn't end there. My father went out and bought 2 goats, lamb pie and lamb. And so my mother fed me on goat's milk, which actually is a very good thing to feed your children. And but that story, later on when I started studying more deeply about my Ukrainian heritage, I learned that genocide of World War II, in which 8 to 10 million Ukrainians were killed, was through starvation. And that Ukraine was known as the breadbasket of Eastern Europe. It raised the most grain and wheat, raised the most wheat of any country there. Those things really kind of overwhelmed me, the layering of that in my life, and how my body held those memories, which when I unpacked it with those other things, helped me understand why I was so drawn to that particular cause. It also helped me understand why it was really difficult for me to work with serving food to people who were hungry. I really wanted to do that, but I felt a really resistance to that. I made donations to food banks and stuff, but for me to be in the presence of people who were hungry, I just became almost nauseous. And I didn't understand the reaction. I cared for them. When I unpacked my story and understood those connections, then I was able to do that work. Those memories are deep. That memory lives in muscle. Emotions live in muscle. That's part of what I learned in my own doctoral program. And so one of the ways of moving that energy is by being in movement consciously. And it doesn't matter whether it's, you know, just moving free form consciously to let out emotional energy, or whether it's dancing, or whether it's singing, or playing an instrument. All of those ways help, when I do it consciously, can help move that energy. And this is something I found really important. Oftentimes we'll talk about negative emotions and positive emotions. The way I like to think about it is the way it responds in the body. And in the body, there are emotions that contract the body, and usually guilt and shame and certain kinds of anger and embarrassment. All of those will contract the body, which makes it less possible for us to think clearly or creatively. When that energy is moved and it just simply wants expression, the phrase we used to use was, in the expression is the transformation, then the body has more space for the expansive emotions. And those include love and compassion. And they also include a kind of anger that is the kind that Alice Walker talks about. It says what you love and what you care about and what you're angry on behalf of can be saved. That's the kind of anger that I bring and I want to continue to bring to being a co-conspirator. When I carry that weight of all that unconscious, unresolved emotional energy, I'm really not able to act. It's kind of like when if you're a parent and you've got a lot going on in you and you're just burdened with a lot of stuff that you're worried about, and your child comes to you and says, "Mom, da da da," you find that you can't even hear that person. You may not even be able to stand to have that child around you because you've got so much going on inside of you. I often talk about giving, when I did parent education, about parents giving themselves a timeout, which might look like just going outside or getting in your car and screaming or whatever it might be, so that that energy can be transformed and changed. When I do the work to unpack my own story, to harvest it, and what I mean by harvest is to make the time to reflect consciously on it without judgment, to embrace all the experiences that are within me, because they're there for me to grow into the person that I want to be and that I am. When I do that work, then I can connect to a power within myself to work for that transformative change. Again, I want to quote Alicia Garza, and this is what she said about co-conspiracy. Co-conspiracy is what we do in action, not just in language. It's about moving through guilt and shame and recognizing that we did not create any of this stuff. And so what we're taking responsibility for is the power that we hold to transform our conditions. You know, the word conspiracy is thrown around a lot today with conspiracy theory, etc. So when I first heard this word co-conspirator, I was a little uncomfortable with it. So I love to go back and find out the roots of words. So here's what the dictionary offered me. There are two definitions of conspire. The first one is something we all recognize from popular use: to join in a secret agreement to do an unlawful or wrongful act, or an act which becomes unlawful as a result of the secret agreement. Okay, lots of conspiracy stuff happening today that fits that. But the second one really caught my attention. To conspire means to act in harmony toward a common end. And the root of that word is the Latin word conspirare, which means to breathe with. In much of world spirituality, the word for breath and for spirit is the same. So I like to think about this now in terms of being a co-conspirator, that I'm actually working and being with people where we share a common breath. That breath might be excitement, it might be an anger for justice, it might be a breath of humor, it might be a breath that moves us to dance and to sing. But being a co-conspirator, to conspire, to act in harmony toward a common end, is what I really embrace. So I wanted to share a resource with you. I believe that there are lots of things that coincide when life is happening. This week, when I was working on this talk and on this presentation, I had just renewed my AARP membership. And in the mail, I received this magazine, which is the most recent issue of O magazine. And on it, you'll recognize the image of Breonna Taylor. This is the first time in the 20 years of the magazine that there has been an image that is not that of Oprah. And the entire magazine has to do with being a co-conspirator. There's one page that I really related to because we've been talking about childhood trauma and other kinds of trauma, and it says, every Black person I meet has experienced more trauma than I ever will. And I really believe and know that's true. But what I really love about this magazine is on the very bottom of every page, and I don't know if you'll be able to see it, there's a red line that runs all the way across the page. And in that red line are actions that anybody can take. And one of them, I don't know if I can find it right now, had to do, really caught my attention because it had to do with wine and supporting Black-owned wineries. And I learned through reading that one of those is in Portland. It's just outside Portland. One of the things that reading through all of those suggestions for action did for me was it did what I teach a class in LA called Native American Women Changemakers. And as I've taught this class over the years, it's expanded my awareness of Native American writers and scientists and authors and lawyers and all kinds of areas in which Native American women work. That's what this issue did for me. All the places where Black people and people of color express themselves in our lives. And it also did this for me. When I lived in Oakland, I was in a community where there were a lot more Black people and Nigerian people and Ethiopian people and lots of people of different races. Here in Ashland, that's not the case. So what it really did for me again was to expand, to remind me of how white my world is, especially here in the Rogue Valley, and how as I go to each one of these actions, and I'm doing many of them, it expands my awareness of where are the Black-owned wineries, and where are the Black-owned artist galleries, etc. And that for me is part of being a co-conspirator, because then I can use my Facebook page to post those up there and share with people. And together we can expand our awareness of who we are in this world today and breathe in harmony with each other for more justice. That phrase, no justice, no peace, has been translated by some people to be KNOW, no justice, no peace. And they really like that because it has to do with increasing knowledge, not just as in my head, but through that body of my story. So that's what I wanted to bring to you today. And I want you to take a minute, if you're willing, to do a little exercise with me. I'm going to invite you in the place that you are to think of an experience when you felt different. And you experienced that difference because of how you were, however that was happening. You experienced that difference as shameful, and maybe there was guilt attached, and maybe you were angry in that experience. And I just want you to take a minute and see if a memory comes up for you about that. And if it does, see if you can be in touch through your body of how old you were, where you were, who was there with you, if anybody was, or if you were alone. And allow yourself, by continuing to breathe, and allow your breath to be deep, allow yourself to embrace that memory. And allow yourself to hold that memory with compassion for yourself. And as you breathe, ask that memory what it wants from you. It may just be for you to connect with it and to say, I love you. And continuing to breathe, exhaling and inhaling. And when you're ready, allow yourself just to release that memory. And know that that's the first part, or one small exercise that you can do to begin to unpack the power of your amazing, complex, and unique story that has a foundation for you to move from an ally to a co-conspirator. So thank you. I welcome any questions or comments. Thank you very much for this opportunity today. I'm going to get a little water.
Thank you so much. That was powerful, Louise. I really like what you said about that the muscles actually hold the trauma. I just did a paper on this yesterday, and you know, a common saying that I keep hearing is the issues are in the tissues, and the body stores the stories. And it's incredibly powerful to hear you talk about that the day after I turned in my paper. I'm getting my yoga certification, and I'm actually specializing in trauma-informed yoga. So there's just a really incredible body of work out there right now, the research that shows how the brain and the body can be so disconnected in trauma. And there's an incredible book called The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk, and it's just fascinating. So does anyone have any questions or comments for Louise? Just let us know in the chat section and we can unmute you.
Hey, Louise, this is Gerald.
Hey, Gerald.
Hey, I'm proud of you. I'm so proud of you for speaking up right now. It's beautiful what you were able to talk about the trauma and the hunger aspect, and kind of relating that back to And I saw you got a little teary-eyed there, but it's beautiful relating that back to your own experience and having an understanding that, yes, that trauma is carried throughout lines. I carry trauma that the father that I don't even have in my life probably has. And, you know, it passes down generationally. It's a piece of me. And just like the trauma for you is a piece of you. And I think just us as humans, we need to have understanding of each other, that we go through that trauma in different ways. We carry it in different ways, and just have an appreciation for each other, just like you said. So I'm very proud of you for speaking up today. I love that you defined the co-conspirator aspect too, because for me too, it was something that I kind of was confused about, just the etymology of it, because you know how they spin words today.
Yeah, yeah.
Calling protests riots, you know how they spin the words, but defining it like that, which I wrote it down too. Let me be.
Yeah, you know, I really appreciate your response, Gerald. I was thinking about another thing, which was my mother was a yeller and a screamer. And we were a small house with a lot of kids. I'm grateful that I grew up on a farm because we could get outside. But I used to find it really, really hard to be around people who were really loud in their voice, or where there were a lot of loud voices. And I'm a musician, so I was always, you know, playing, and that never bothered me. And when I began to unpack just how that sound of her verbal abuse, that was pretty constant, where that landed in me, it also gave me appreciation for why I love to sing and why I love to make big sounds, because it helps me move that. And just the appreciation, what science actually affirms, this is not some type of magical thing, but science and medicine actually affirm that understanding that we now have of how trauma is in the body. And because the body is 90% fluid, there's no literal time in the body. Everything is now. So the notions of past, present, and future are all now. And that's part of why when we enter into some kind of a traumatic memory, everything appears. It's all there, all this unresolved. And that we have the power to then meet it, because it won't come to us until we have that. So thanks, Gerald. Appreciate the comments.
Louise,
Yeah.
Vicky wrote, "Thank you, Louise. Your memory exercise was especially effective."
Well,
And
no,
no, go ahead.
I'm glad to know that, because sometimes people think it's really like this is sounds so complicated, and do I have to go to school to do this? No, not really. That's what harvesting is really about. What I mean by that word is just setting aside some time and to consciously make a choice. I'm going to do this right now. And I've been a writer for a long time. So sometimes the first thing that happens for me after I'm in contact with a memory, and that's in me, is I just start writing. You know, just write words, or I might just draw something, or just use colors, so that I can actually anchor that. So I can anchor that somewhere to honor my experience, not even so much for analysis, just to anchor it. So I appreciate that Vicky, you found that exercise useful, and that you can use it again as much as you want. Thanks.
Okay, great. And it looks like Amy wrote, "Wonderful presentation, Louise. Thank you so very much for showing us your path." And Lori Schaff wrote, "Thanks for talking with us, Louise. I'm thankful for your activism." And Charlotte does have a question, so we'll go ahead and unmute Charlotte right now, and she can ask you.
Hey, Charlotte.
Charlotte, can you unmute yourself?
Thank you, Louise.
Hey, Charlotte. Yeah.
I've heard you before at Ollie. Two things came up for me. The issues are in the tissues. I like that. That was really great. But thinking about, I worked for the airlines for many years, so I traveled a lot. And I lived in cities that were multi-ethnic and biracial, and so it was sort of like you. It was very culturally rich, and I loved it. But I went to West Africa in Lagos, Nigeria, and my first impression, I had never been to a predominantly Black country that was, it was a city. It was lots of Black people, and I was the minority. And it wasn't frightening, but it was, I went with 3 other friends, and it was, oh, I know how minorities feel in this situation. And we took a tour, and I can't remember exactly where it was, but it was, I think it was the island where they, and this was such a long time ago, where they shipped the Black slaves, or the Black people, to become slaves to the West Indies and America. And we went into the place where they actually pushed them into the boats. And we stood there, or I stood there, and it was like, I could feel all of this pain and just, I can't even express what I felt. In fact, it's coming up now. And it was another generation, obviously, but I felt the sorrow and pain and the anguish and the embarrassment and the guilt that I was a white in the white race, and that my ancestors did this horrible thing. And the other issue is when I used to love to drink and do drugs and hang out and party. And what kept me from becoming sober, which I am now, I'm 24 years clean and sober, but what kept me from doing this and opening up inside was my shame and embarrassment and guilt of being a female alcoholic or drug addict. And it took me a long time. I had to do a lot of inside work, and I had to have a lot of help, outside help. But I truly believe now that, and I've let go of a lot of things, and that I feel that the dis-ease of the body is caused by all of these memories, or even generational memories that are in our cells. And I work really hard to not keep things. And even currently, when I have a disagreement with someone, it's like I want to clean up my side of the street and be open and honest and release the negativity of it all, because it doesn't rest in my body very well. But I don't know how I can release the feelings of my feeling when I was in West Africa, and I had that feeling. And when you brought that up of generational things coming up, I probably need to sit quiet and see how I feel, or maybe you can give some guidance to that. Thank you.
Well, thank you for sharing, Charlie. I really appreciate it. Yeah, I think the fact that that has come up during this time that we're spending together today tells me that it has value for you. And, you may write something or draw something, whatever your way of creatively expressing yourself is. To anchor that, so that it's not just in the memory in your muscles, in your tissues, but you give it an external form. You've done that already by sharing that story with us today. And to embrace those feelings that you have, because those feelings can be a bridge to compassion for the work that we're doing on behalf of each other, especially with Black Lives Matter. You know, to feel that, and I think that's where that quote from Alicia Garza comes in for me. We did not create any of this stuff. You, maybe your ancestors did, but you didn't. And so, you know, to be able to do some type of forgiveness for yourself and your own ancestral line. For me, when I began looking at my French Canadian line, that was really horrifying, because the French Canadians in Quebec, which is where my father's family was from, the brutal colonization, and especially toward women, that was done. You know, with Ukraine, I could identify with the side that was suffering and that was, you know, basically wiped out. But with the French side, the French Canadian side, I had to own and come in contact with that colonizing side. So, you know, being able to, I think that's part of the work of harvesting, is how can I expand my own energy to be able to hold both of these in myself in a way that can be of service to others and not crippling to my ability to take action. When you mentioned Lagos, my first time of being in a country where I was a minority as a white woman was Jamaica. And I went with a friend of mine on a little vacation. I'd never been in an island country. And I felt the same things. I just, at first, was very self-conscious about my whiteness, not even so much being a woman, but really being white. And, you know, I just began to allow myself to feel that as a way of understanding exactly what you said, what people of color, what Black people probably feel 24 hours a day in this white culture. And that really helped me. You know, that helped me kind of ground that experience and also be able to tap into that empathy and compassion. So I don't know if that's helpful, Charlotte, but I really appreciate that you brought your stories to this sharing today. Thank you so much.
Great. It looks like Vicky wrote, just FYI, many West African slaves were sent out of Gambia. Perhaps that was where Charlotte had visited the prison?
Goree Island
Goree Island.
in Nigeria.
I want to say, I didn't say anything about what I'm wearing here today, and maybe some have wondered. This cloth is called a rushniki, and it's a cloth that is made by women. It's akin to the shawl that a Native American woman would wear, and the colors are significant. The red represents woman's menstrual blood. The black represents the earth, because in really rich earth country, you know, lands, the earth is very black. The white represents semen, and oftentimes there's little gold threads that are also woven into it that represents the sun. So these cloths are made by women. The patterns have a really deep symbology, and they're used when a baby comes out of the womb. They're wrapped in it. When a woman is married, it's the first cloth that she and her partner will step onto. When a girl has her menstruation, when she has her first menses, it's a cloth that's wrapped around her. So the cloth has a lot of meaning. And this one I got when I was in Kiev many years ago, and I treasured a lot. It was also amazing to me that these colors are also the colors of the Fourfold Way in terms of many Native American nations. And I began to see, again, connections between my history as a Ukrainian American, French Canadian, with Native American cultures. And that, again, built those bridges of understanding for me in terms of why I was interested in learning more about that. So, anyone else has questions or comments?
That's really interesting, and it's beautiful. Thanks for sharing that. I will never look at that the same again. You know, I did have to take a quick break And I didn't know if you and Carrie had a chance to share the pictures that you had of your
Yeah, I
family.
think those came up in the beginning.
Great. If they did, it was right when I had to take a little break.
I'd like to make one
So,
other
okay.
comment, because Charlotte, you pointed toward it, and I really didn't spend much time about it. You know, one of the things in terms of embodiment is the fact that I'm in the body of a woman, and I live in patriarchal culture. So oftentimes the experiences that I've had that are one of the things I'm unpacking have to do with being a woman. And just the thing of the high and intense requirements in the patriarchal culture of the beauty culture that none of us, regardless of our size or shape, can ever meet. But the kind of shaming and body shaming and size shaming that is there is also a thing that, for me, as I came to appreciate the power of working that process, unpacking that process, helped me just get, again, another layer of bridging, of compassion and breathing with for what it means to be in a body that is Black, or a body that is a different color than what is the color of the dominant culture. And, you know, as I felt with, you know, I had no control over the fact that my feet were knock-kneed and my knees were, that was not being pigeon-toed. I often have asked some Black women friends of mine, how do you feel about being born and having Black skin? And one woman just got really angry at me and said, it was nothing I had any control over. And I said, yeah, I totally understand that. And she said, you know, it's taken me a long time. People say Black is beautiful. And there are days when I work damn hard to embrace that and believe that. And there's a lot of time where I wish I was in a different colored skin. And I hate myself for feeling that. And we have this really excellent conversation because I, you know, got the fact that, you know, I'm in this woman's body. I think on some level I chose to be, but nonetheless, that put, you know, I'm in lots of situations where somebody will say, oh, you're so, you know, thank you, honey, or thank you, sweetie. And I just want to like, I'm not your honey, I'm not your sweetie. And I know they wouldn't say that to a man. And it has to do with being a woman. So that's another level of what the body has in terms of the potential for doing this work and unpacking that and building these bridges of compassion for being a co-conspirator.
It looks like Anna wrote in the chat box. Anna, do you want to talk, or do you want me to read that for you? I'll go ahead and start. I'll start, and then you can finish, Anna, if you want to unmute yourself. I just sent you the permission. She says, I had a really powerful realization a couple of months ago. There was a Black Lives Matter march that came past our house, and I felt myself pushing back against joining in. I'm sorry, I went down too far. It's hard for me to read in the chat. I'm sorry. I'm going to have Gerald read it. He can read better than I can.
All right, you ready? Do this. All right, let's start from the top. I had a really powerful realization a couple months ago. There was a Black Lives Matter march that came past our house, and I felt myself pushing back against joining it in. And I had no idea why, because I'm absolutely in line with the message of the movement. Talking it through with my wife, I realized that I was pushing back because I've spent my life trying to not be so sensitive, trying to not let things get to me. And the idea that all of a sudden there's an encouragement to go out and shout in the streets was challenging the safety I'd found by closing myself off to feel deep feelings about injustice and violence. I was really conflicted about why now. And not before, which brought up a couple ideas. Maybe the most important thing, being able to protect my sensitivity through distancing myself from painful things is a privilege. Can you read it?
Oh, can you read it? Yes, we can. Louise, and maybe while you answer that, just to let everybody know, Carrie said we did not share the pictures earlier. So when you're done commenting on this, we'll share those pictures, okay?
Okay, sounds fine. Sounds good. I missed the name of the person making the comments. What was that person's name?
Anna.
Hmm?
Anna.
Oh, Anna. Okay.
That's Anna's husband.
Oh, that's Anna's husband. Okay.
Yeah.
Anna's husband. I think that it's so important to meet yourself where you are. And, you know, whatever that means for you in terms of the way that you're a co-conspirator. You know, maybe because of things that have happened in your life, joining a protest, marching on the street is not the place for you to be. It's not the only way to do something. I think what's really important in what you shared is to explore those questions. And especially that question, why now? You know, with sound, with things where people are yelling, etc. I know for me, as I said, that has really deep connections into my early family life. And so, you know, I would just, you know, offer you the idea of exploring where, maybe you already know where that's come from. And if maybe this is a time to take another step deeper into that healing, not necessarily so you can go out and join a protest, but just so that you can feel less conflicted in yourself about what actions are appropriate for you right now. I do not always feel comfortable to go out and be in crowds and protesting. In fact, the first time we went out, because of a lot of my own body shaming, I really was afraid to be seen. And so I kind of stayed way to the back and kind of in the midst of the crowd. I didn't want anybody to see me being there, because being noticed in my family was not a good thing. It usually brought a lot of verbal abuse from my mother. And I didn't understand that at the time, why I felt so uncomfortable, because as you said, Anna's husband, I was very much in line with what the protest was about. So I didn't join them for a while until I was able to kind of get more awareness of what that was about for me. So I just encourage you, you've done, obviously from what you're sharing, seems like a lot of work for yourself. And just to embrace that this has come up for you right now and work it as much as you want to. So I think Carrie is bringing up the pictures of, the first one is going to be, that's the farm I grew up on, 7016 New Hope Road. That was the barn I played in and learned to milk cows in. They had a really good harvest of corn that year in the beautiful mountains behind there. Yeah, thank you. And I think the next one is a picture of my mom. And there's the barn again. And there's my mom. Okay, this is Pauline Leshock, Pauline Sheffick Leshock. And she's wearing what is called the Oregon shawl, which she knitted. She was an accomplished master knitter. That shawl was designed by a teacher in Oregon, and she was at my niece's graduation. So that's my mama. And the next picture will be of my papa and my mama. There they are. That's Gerard. And my mother standing in front of the tree that was in front of our old house. And so those are my parents and a little bit of the farm that I grew up on. Thanks, Carrie, for going back in and getting us.
Sorry about that, Carrie. We put it in a slideshow and it kept wanting to advance to the next picture, so Carrie had to keep backing it out.
That's okay. I'm just a farm girl at heart, so you know.
Does
Any other comments or questions?
So I guess I could kind of comment on Anna's partner's comment.
Yeah, please, Gerald. Yeah.
And I more so felt the same way that you felt with going out and doing these protests. It wasn't really until George Floyd died that I got the confidence to go out to a protest. That was really like the realizing moment that kind of pushed me past the point of like, this isn't a choice anymore. I have to go out and do this. And I will tell you now with Jeff Blake's death, it's made it a little extra, or not death, his shooting. Let's call it that. He's in critical condition. We don't know if he's going to die or not, but with that, it's kind of it's put another layer on my abolitionist mindset, and I can understand where you're coming from, where it's like, what was the turning point? And I really think it's just it's the perfect storm right now. We have people stuck in the house, quarantining, being forced to see this stuff in a different realm. And now it's becoming more prevalent because it's there in front of you, but it's always been here. Just like you said, it's always been here. But now, because it's a perfect storm, you see a lot of people are now stepping up for it. People are now speaking out, which is beautiful. It's a beautiful thing to see. So that's kind of my standpoint, and where I got to where I wanted to speak out, where I started going to protest, having the confidence to go out and use my voice. But yeah.
Thanks, John. I just want to give a shout out to the Say Their Names Memorial and what's happened with that here in Ashland this past week. I think it was Friday night. It was vandalized. All the t-shirts were torn off the fence. It was left completely empty. And by noon on Saturday, families and people have gathered, the word got out, and that fence has been completely rebuilt within these last few days. I drove past it on my way to work today, and it is filled even more with, the simple tools of the people, so to speak, cardboard and clothespins. And somebody took a sweatshirt and spray painted the name, I think, of Breonna Taylor on there. So, that's another place where if I'm not comfortable or whatever and going in protest, I can make a little sign and I can go to my local Say Their Names Memorial and put it up there. And, it's a simple action, but it has power. And if I don't feel that's what I want to do, I can go walk that and just say the names of the people that are on that fence and research. Maybe I don't know who some of those people are. Google their names and expand my awareness of that. So just a shout out to the people of Ashland for the way that we have been able to transform that really violent act of vandalism into new creativity that I think has probably involved even more of the community. So I encourage you to go walk the Say Their Names Memorial at Railroad Park. So I'm getting the sign that we have like 4 minutes left. So if anybody has a comment or question or experience you want to share, jump in now.
Charlotte has another
Go for it,
question
Charlotte. Thank you.
or comment.
I was just wanted to express how I was feeling. I've lived all over the United States in various positions and stuff with the airlines, and I was living in Oklahoma, and I had moved from the East Coast, lots of people, very integrated, but Oklahoma is a bit at that time was a bit pasteurized, I guess. I don't know what you'd call it, but they weren't really, maybe a few natives that I could see. But anyhow, long story short, somehow I was, my condo was broken into, and a man accosted me with a knife and lots of stuff and took my money. And so the gentleman that I was dating at the time, he wasn't there, took me to a gun show because he thought that I needed a gun to protect myself. And the minute I went into this, I've never been to a gun show before, and I never have since. I went into this gun show, and my heart was like, there was so much negativity, negative energy in there, I felt. And it was obviously it was me that I felt fear. I didn't feel shame, but I felt just so much fear in there and uncomfortableness. And people were buying all sorts of guns and talking about them and blah, blah. And it was just awful. And he took me to a gun range where tried to keep, before that, to teach me how to use a pistol. And I hated that. I mean, I guess I'm trying to say I'm a real pacifist and I'm afraid of guns. And maybe, I mean, my family never had guns, but maybe there's something in my heritage that they used a lot of guns, and maybe there was a murder. I don't know, but I just intense emotion when I was in that gun show. It was awful. Anyhow, I know you're. I
appreciate where you went with that, wondering if there is something in your own background in which guns were very prominent. And that would be really interesting to research and just to try to find out, because oftentimes the things that we really have those reactions to is because there's something there that has been with us. So I appreciate you bringing that forward, and just encourage you to do whatever you can to find out about that, because guns were so much a part of many colonizers' tools. So who knows? But thank you for raising that, because the only time I ever saw a gun in our house, my father had a rifle, and usually we had our own animals, that we raised for food. But the one time I ever saw him try to shoot it was trying to shoot a wild turkey. He was in his underwear. He opened up the living room door and tried to shoot this wild turkey. Well, we all ended up laughing because he missed it by a mile. So when I first saw my father holding the gun, I was really just shocked, and a little bit afraid. But then when I saw him miss, it kind of transformed that energy into something that was humorous. But anyway, so we all have our own kind of histories that sometimes we're just not aware of in terms of guns and that kind of thing. So thank you, Charlotte. I appreciate you sharing.
Okay, thank you so much, Louise. That was amazing. And I imagine a little bit of the humor with that shot that was so far off was also that you saw your dad in his underwear.
Well, no, I've seen him in his underwear before, but that combination was like a Saturday Night Live thing.
Okay, well, and Vicki, we'll leave with this comment from Vicki, and then we'll go ahead and close, and I'll make this available for everyone. But Vicki wrote, plenty of opportunities to explore issues involving race in Ashland on the Nextdoor social network.
Yeah.
Okay, everyone, thank you so much. Thank you, Louise. That was amazing.
Jamie, thank you very much. Thank you, Carrie, for helping with all of the technology. Really appreciate it. Have a great day, everybody.